Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader, a podcast dedicated to discussing women's unique challenges in the tech industry. I'm your host, Limor Bergman-Gross, and today I have a very, very special guest. Her name is Jossie Haines, and for those who don't know her, she is an incredible and inspiring engineering leader. Jossie is the former VP of Engineering at Tile and an executive coach, and she's passionate like me about empowering women in tech. So we share the same mission, and her impressive careers spans across companies like Apple, Zynga, and as I mentioned, Tile. And she's a fierce advocate for women in tech. And her journey is a testament for the power of persistence and importance of self-advocacy. And this episode, we decided to dedicate it to discussing promotions, and Jossie shares actionable insights on how to navigate the often tricky path for getting promoted. And if you're feeling stuck in your current role, or if you're wondering, how can I make that big leap? I think this conversation is going to help you tremendously because it's packed with tips and strategies that you can implement. So, sit down, relax, and join us for this insightful conversation. Let's dive right in. Hi, Jossie. Welcome. How are you?
Good to chat with you. It's been a little bit.
Yes. I'm so excited to having you here. I've been thinking about you a lot, and I've been following you a lot on LinkedIn. So super excited to talk to you. And today we're going to talk about promotions, which is very exciting.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yes. And we want to help all the women that are listening to us today to get promoted, because both of us know what not to do and what to do. So we're going to share a little bit. And you mentioned in our pre-call, that there are several steps for promotion. So let's start with step one. And you mentioned step one is knowing when to negotiate. So why don't you share about maybe what not to do and what to do?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the common things I see, especially, as we go up the career ladder, is we wait for performance review time to negotiate for a promotion. And I always tell people that's actually the worst time to actually start the conversation about a promotion, because you have no time at that point to course correct or to get the experience, right? I mean, it's like they say with investing, right? It is better to have that conversation to start investing now, but the best time was 20 years ago, right? If you're older. And it's the same thing with performance reviews, right? Like if you haven't had the conversation at all, right? Yes, you can have the conversation then around your promotion, but it is not the best time to start having the conversation, because there is very little that you could potentially do from a time perspective, right? If they want to see you, show more experience on a certain project, right? Like that's really not the best time. And the other mistake I see is you have that conversation at performance review time, and then you get a no. And then people feel bad. They're like, oh, I didn't get my promotion. So what happens next is you then wait till next performance review time, because you're like, oh, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person who's nagging my boss about a promotion. So I don't say anything until next performance review period. And yet the same conversation happens again. And so the most important thing is, though, having a proactive approach, right? Like having an ongoing conversation about this. And your male colleagues are doing this, right? Like this is a conversation I have to have with so many women. It's like, I think people feel bad. They're like, but I mentioned it and I got to know. So I'm pestering my boss. And I'm like, I'm not saying that every conversation with your boss centers around your promotion, but at least for me, like when I was leading a large team and I had direct reports, I usually would try to make sure every 4 to 6 weeks we were touching on somebody's career, right?
Yeah,
During their one-on-one conversations. But not every boss is going to be proactive about doing that. And so it's really on us to have those ongoing conversations about what we want and where we want to get to.
absolutely. This is wonderful. So I think let's kind of summarize it. First of all, you need to be proactive. I know that I've used to think that I just need to be very nice and do the job and someone will notice and promote me. And I keep saying that it doesn't work that way. Or I would caveat 99% of the time it doesn't work. It could work,
Mhm,
but most
mhm.
of the time it doesn't work. You have to be proactive. You have to talk with your manager on a regular basis about not just promotion, but about your career and get feedback.
Yep. And I think another thing to add to that, right, around the kind of like ongoing conversations around promotion is I think people also sometimes are afraid of saying, like, hey, I want to be a VP someday, right? Like maybe your long-term goal is to be a VP. Maybe you're like an entry-level manager right now, right? And they feel afraid of saying that because they're like, well, then I'm telling my boss that I want his job. And I'm like, you're not saying to your boss that you want to become VP today, right? You're saying like in the future you want that, right? And like that actually helps your boss set you up for success. So don't be afraid of sharing some of your like future goals, right? And then I think the other thing that can sometimes get us in trouble is I think early in our career, it's more likely that we will get promoted just because we're doing a good job, right? Like for that first promotion after, from software engineer, right? Like I see early in careers, like it does happen, right? And so I think we get into this mindset of, well, it happened back then. Like, why do I have to be advocating for myself now? And I see people getting into these thought processes around like, oh, does my boss not value me? Like, is that what's going on? And that's part of where imposter syndrome can kick in as well. And it's like, no, like your boss, especially as you go up the career ladder, like they're just getting busy. So do not take this as a personal thing about like you and really it's a part of the process.
For sure. And we all know that everyone is super busy, and your manager is probably very, very busy doing their job and whatever else is top of mind for them. And they don't think of you of every second, right? So you have to be mindful of that.
Right. And your boss doesn't know what you're doing 40 hours a week or 50 hours, however many hours
Yeah,
you're spending
exactly.
working, right? So again, you have to be, sharing what it is that you're doing.
Definitely. And you said it's not a good time to talk about promotion during the performance review.
Mhm.
Based on your experience, how long ahead of time typically it would make sense to start that conversation about, I think I'm ready, I want to move to the next level, and so forth?
Yeah. So usually companies do performance reviews like every 6 months on average. Like sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but I would say the major performance reviews happen every 6 months or every year, right? So I think like the midpoint is a great time to have that conversation or like after your performance review, right? Like usually what your manager does is like they sit down with you and say like, hey, these are the things we're going to be working on, right? Over here's your goals, here's the things I'd like to see. And that conversation in and of itself is also a great time to start the conversation there if you feel you're ready and say, these goals are great. And one of the other things I'd also like to talk about is how in the next 6 months we can set me up for getting to that promotion, right? And then you're actually doing your boss a really great service, right? Because as a manager, it can be really hard to have somebody come in right before performance review and say, I want a promotion. And you're like, oh, you get this like pit
Yeah.
in your stomach going like, oh my gosh, I don't think this person is ready. And so you have that difficult conversation. And hey, it's part of our jobs as managers to have those, right? But I mean, as a manager, I'm very empathetic, right? I want to get my team members to succeed and get the promotions that they desire, right? And I want to set them up for success. And I know as a manager that I'm going to need time to make sure they're on the right projects, make sure they're communicating effectively, that we're having the right conversations around this. And guess what? Some people don't want a promotion. Right? Like there are also some people who are very comfortable in their roles and they don't want a promotion. And so for those folks, I might not want to push them as much if they want to just keep deep diving into the thing that they're doing. Unless, obviously we want people to grow and give them feedback, but it's different, for example, if somebody wants one or not. So if your manager doesn't know, they might not be setting you up for success,
For sure. Yeah. And don't assume that they can read your minds and know what you want, because usually they cannot. And to me, it happened, earlier in my career that actually no one knew I wanted to be a manager. So they just put me on the IC path. So we cannot assume that our manager knows what we want. We have to be very clear in the communication.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's move into the next step about how to negotiate a promotion. And you mentioned like creating a promotion packet. So I'll let you kind of explain that.
Yeah. And so it really depends at your company how promotions are done, right? Especially at larger companies, there tends to be a much more formal process, and you create this thing called a promotion packet. There might even be templates and examples of this that are available at your company for you to look at, right? And even if your company doesn't have an official promotion packet, what it can be really useful to do is look at your leveling guide and say like, hey, here's for all the things that it says I need to do for that level. And here's the examples of where I believe I've shown that, so that you can start the conversation with your manager, right? And this really goes back to that whole like, don't feel bad if your manager is not proactively, jumping like, I'm going to go create your promotion packet for you, because this goes back to, it's not because your manager doesn't want to, it's because your manager is also very busy, right? And your manager, again, they might not know everything you've worked on and all of the examples. So this needs to be like a co-creation process. This isn't just like you go and tell your manager, I want a promotion, go create my promotion packet for me.
Yeah, and I think that it's really a collaboration. It's shared responsibility, right? I mean, a lot of people tend to think, oh, my manager's job is to promote me, I'm ready. And a lot of people think, oh, it's just tenure. I've been here long enough, so I deserve it. It doesn't work that way. And it's a shared responsibility that both of you need to work together to realize, what you need to prove, basically, to show. Because you need to show some of the skills before you get promoted, so your manager can get the confidence that you're actually ready.
Right. And I mean, at larger companies, like your promotion packet, like especially for engineers, we'll talk about like you have to show this level of technical competency, and you have to like literally attach like potentially like PRs or examples for code that highlight like, hey, this is something I architected, right? And so this, especially, for those getting promoted, like this can take a while, and it is not always common that the first time you present a promotion packet, it's going to get through the committee. Because again, at larger companies, what tends to happen is there's a committee of folks who review your promotion. It's not just your boss getting to decide that you get promoted or not. And your boss basically has to defend to the committee along with the promotion packet, like, this is why I think this person should get promoted. And they're looking across all of the promotions to try to make sure they're doing an equitable process of promoting folks. And so I think it's also, don't get disappointed if you hear a no this time, because that just means no right now.
Yeah, not now. Yeah, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
no forever, and it doesn't mean that you're a failure. So don't take it too personally.
Yep, exactly.
Yes, I mean, I've had those we call it calibration meetings. I think like what you mentioned, like to make
Yep.
sure that we are kind of because what happens a lot of times, different managers have different kind of ways of looking into performance, and I want to make sure that we are all aligned and we not have our own like biases influencing who gets promoted and who doesn't, and to kind of create an equitable place that people are promoted kind of based on similar characteristics.
Right. And it's the other thing is hopefully in those meetings to create that equitable environment, somebody's calling out if they do see bias show up in those, right? And so that, I think sometimes people feel like, oh my gosh, this whole process feels a little unfair. But it's like, actually, the whole point of the process is to try to add a little bit of equitableness to the process. So I'm not saying it's always perfect, but hopefully it is, hopefully some, for the managers listening, don't be quiet. Like if you see something that sounds a little biased showing up in one of those meetings, be sure to speak up and say something.
Yeah, for sure. We want to say that because sometimes there are some favoritism or, things not necessarily doing from bad intentions, but people have those kind of, ingrained biases that they maybe are not aware of. And we need to point that out for sure.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted you to ask you, you mentioned a story and I thought it was very interesting about, a woman, I think that was a client of yours that kind of created her own promotion packet. Are you willing to share that?
Yeah. So I was coaching somebody that works at a large Fortune 100 company, and she was frustrated because she had spoken to her boss about getting a promotion at her previous performance review, and he was just like, not yet. And she wasn't seeing him like engage and create this, and create the promotion packet. And so I said to her, I was like, well, you can take the initiative. Like you can start and create an initial version of the promotion packet. I think what was really interesting is I actually coached 15 women at this company. A lot of them didn't even know, like there was example promotion packets on their intranet. Like there's resources there, especially at larger companies. Like be sure to go find them, right? And so she created an initial version and shared it with her boss. And her boss was like, oh, this is great. I didn't realize how important this was to you. And so he took it and then created it and presented it. And I actually heard back from her and she was like, it didn't get passed through this time, but my boss and I now have like a really clear list of things for me to work on. And she told me, she's like, Jossie, if it wasn't for you, like, I wouldn't even have had the ability to present it. And she feels like so confident. She knows like it'll happen now versus before she was just feeling so stuck, right? Like, oh my gosh, like this isn't going to happen. Like I'm never going to get promoted. And it really just started with encouraging her, like, no, just create the packet, right? And because again, in her mind was some of those thoughts. She was like, but why hasn't my boss done it for me? Right? Like he must not think I'm ready. And I said, let's you're making assumptions, right?
Exactly.
Like let's stop making assumptions and create the packet, make sure we're talking about the impact you're making and really focus on that.
For sure. And I see that also a lot, Jossie, with my clients. Like a lot of women feel, I would carefully use the word powerless in a way. So they feel like, okay, their manager has the power to decide whether or not, they will do a certain things, they will get promoted, they will get whatever. Actually, they have a lot of power and they can forge their own path and take more initiative and drive things. And it works.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we can have a whole conversation about like the power of saying no, right? Like, so, I've coached women where they're telling me, they're like, I can't say no, I'll get fired. I'm like, you just got a large raise. Like, I don't think you're going to get fired if you say no to something.
For sure, yeah. And let's switch to talk about the cultural mindset, because the mindset is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of talked a little bit about kind of the mindset that you need to have and how you talk about your achievements and the impact. So
Yep.
can you share about that?
Yes. We talked about this at the beginning a
Yeah.
little bit, right? I think, and it's a cultural thing too, right? We're taught to be good little girls. We're if we're too assertive, we're considered aggressive, right? And so there's this cultural belief, like, hey, let me just sit back. Let me sit back, and I will wait for my promotion, and it will come because I am doing good work, right? And we don't speak up for the things that we're working on. We don't highlight our projects because we're like, oh, our boss should know what we're working on. They should see the projects. And ultimately, like, our boss is not sitting in our chair with us 24/7, right? They don't know the things that are going on. They're not in every single meeting with us, right? So first, it is like crazy to think that your boss knows everything that you might have accomplished in a week.
Yeah.
And so first, it's even thinking about how can you start communicating that with your boss on a regular basis? Obviously one-on-ones, it's a great time to have this as a discussion. What I recommend a lot of the folks I work with is actually start like a log with your boss for your one-on-ones and highlight like, hey, these are my accomplishments for the week. Like, and if you're a leader, like, hey, these are the things that I've worked on. These are the things my team has worked on, right? Because I think, especially speaking to folks who are leaders, right? One of the things that can be really hard, especially as you go up the career ladder, is saying like, well, my team is doing this, but what am I doing? Right. And I think people start getting into a little bit of imposter syndrome
Yeah.
around that. And that's really then where, like, what are the strategic things that you are doing that move the needle? Like, that's what you start highlighting as you go up the career ladder as well. Right. And hey, your team accomplishments are your accomplishments too, because I'll make a bet you did little things to make that your team successful, right? So it's really about thinking about it holistically. So I just wanted to touch on that for
Yeah,
the
for sure.
leaders who might be listening here. And then it's for everybody, but again, especially as you go up the career ladder, this is more and more important. It is framing achievements from the lens of business impact. Why does this matter, right? Like, if you want to get promoted to like the VP or the exec level, for example, I will make a bet that, at that meeting is going to be people who are not technical, who are in the room, and they're not going to understand what it means that you architected some like beautiful project that took you, however long. Like, they don't care. What they care is that this like huge, implementation you did is now bringing the company, 10 times the revenue and is saving, so much inefficiency, right? Like, that's what's going to matter as you go up the career ladder. And I think, again, as engineers, like, we understand why we're doing the things we're doing kind of intrinsically. And we're like, well, why doesn't everybody else get it? And so we don't think we need to explain, but we really do.
For sure, yeah. We need to explain it in a way that the audience or the stakeholders can understand, and to be honest, that they care. Because some of the
Yep.
things we care about as engineers, they may not care much. So we
Nope.
actually need to get into their head and think about what they care about.
Yep. And what really motivates them, right? So if you know who's going to be at your collaboration, or I always forget what that's called. Yeah, the meeting, it's like, what do they care about? Like, what motivates them, right? Like, And how can you make sure, and I mean, this is applicable outside of promotions too. Like anytime you're trying to influence somebody, right? Like this is a huge influence skill, is what is that person's motivation? Like what is it that they really care about? And how can you tie what you want to that person?
Absolutely. And I think this is something that I always talk about it's going back to influence. Like most people naturally think about what do I want to get? Why it's
Mm-hmm.
important for me, and less about why would that person want you to be promoted? Like why would whoever CEO or whoever will want you to be promoted other than okay,
Mm-hmm.
they care about your career. What's in it for
Right.
them? And what do they care
Yes.
about and how can you help their company?
Yes. 100%. And right now, what are tech companies caring about? They want to see cost savings. They want to see efficiency. They want to see an improvement in revenue. And right now, we've got AI as a big thing. So a lot of companies want to see, like, hey, how are we integrating AI? But it's not just for the sake of integrating AI, it's tied back to one of the earlier things that I mentioned, right? So it's really thinking about like, okay, how is my promotion helping the company? Because ultimately, this is a business, right? And I think that's that. I mean, and not that our careers matter, right? But it's also we also have to take that step back and realize like this is a business. It is ultimately about the bottom line. If you're working at a profit company, and so we need to consider like what is it that matters.
Absolutely. And let's talk about you a little bit and have you share your uh, your personal experience and how you kind of created the VP of engineering role at Tide.
Yes, yes. So, I was prior to being a coach full time, I worked at Tile for about 5 years. And so I started as the partner engineering director, where I was integrating the Tile technology into lots of partner ecosystems. So, any IoT related device company. So, like into Amazon Alexa, Google Homes, Intel, you name it, I most likely chatted with somebody if they did some IoT thing. And I've known my boss for my boss at Tile for a long time. We'd worked together. That was actually the third company we worked together at. And we're both strong engineers, but we very much complement each other. He is much stronger at like the pure technical architecture side of things, and I am much stronger at the leadership side of things, right? And so it was the middle of COVID, and we were about to go into a big growth spurt. And so I really wanted to get to the VP level as well. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I didn't want to do this. Like, this was my career ambition and goal. And so I was thinking about, okay, how do I get what I want and tie it to what's really important for the business? And at the time, we were growing the team. We were going to double the size of the engineering team. We were working on some really large initiatives, which meant we were going to need to restructure how the team was set up to be successful, because we were pretty siloed across the different parts of the org. And so I created a proposal. I created a proposal that said, hey, let's promote my boss to CTO so that he can focus on some of the larger architectural initiatives that we need to be building. And let's promote me from senior director to VP so that I can then kind of lead the hiring, organizational structure, and get us set up for success. And I'm not saying that this happened overnight, right? Like I created the proposal, and I think it took about 3 to 4 months to get it finalized and approved and everything rolling. But I really tied it to the business impact, right? Which was like, how do we create an organization that sets us up for success throughout the next year and into the future as well? And so we created it, we got the promotions done, and then we basically doubled the team in 4.5 months in the middle of COVID while keeping our inclusive culture. I also headed up DEI at Tile at the time. And so making sure that like inclusion wasn't just lip service was, one of my key things. And we did it, right? And so and we also completely restructured how the teams were run. We now moved to more of a pod structure to make sure that we could actually build our products features end to end, because we used to have these problems where like 3 of the teams would have enough resources, but the 4th team wouldn't. And so we were getting stuck actually getting features. So we became much more like feature centric from an org structure perspective. And, it really did set us up for success for the next year. And I really truly believe it was because I was able to, it happened not just because, I said, hey, I want this promotion. It's because I really tied it to here's what we need for this transition to be successful as a business.
Yeah, and I think you also, what was beautiful about what you shared, it's not just that you build a business case, but you also find a perfect spot where your manager can make the impact that kind of utilizes his strength the best way possible, and the impact that you kind of bring. So it kind of aligned beautifully to the skills and interests probably that he had versus yours.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, right? Like, as I said, I've now known him for over 20 years. At that time, I think I was like 15, right? My goal was not to get him like fired or I just was like, how do I set this up so it's like everyone gets to leverage their strengths and I also get the promotion I would like, and so I was really looking at it from like, how do I turn this into a win-win, right? I think again, a lot of times I talk to women and they're like, oh, I can't want a promotion because then like what's going to happen to my boss? And it's like, well, what is the win-win here? Like, could you set everybody up for success?
For sure. It's not always so easy to identify that.
No. No. I think when you work at a smaller company, you have a lot more power to do things like this, right? So at the time, I think Tile was around 150 people or so, right? I think there is definitely a sweet spot when a company is under like 1,000 people where you can advocate for things like this much more than, at the Googles and the FANGs of the world.
Yeah, but I would say there is always opportunities to do more and to create a greater impact, right? We talked about impact. Impact is not always about titles. So I know that we're talking here about promotions, but it's not the only thing that matters.
Yes, absolutely. And since we're talking on the topic of this and negotiations, actually, that is especially at bigger companies right now, getting promotions. Like a lot of companies actually are saying there's no promotions or there's very limited promotions. And you can advocate for different things, right? So you can advocate for like, hey, I still would like more scope, right? I actually was chatting with a former client, and what she advocated for is she wants a 4-day work week, right? And she was able to get that at like a very large FANG company, right? And so, don't feel limited by, I think so often we get stuck in this, like, but I'm not getting that next title. And, with one of my clients I was speaking, I was like, but you actually just got the raise a lot that you would have gotten if you had gotten that title. They just can't give you the title right now for, political reasons or whatever, right? So think about like, what is it that, the title is not a direct value of your worth, right? I think we often, and hey, I get it, like getting the promotion is important too, right?
Yeah.
I want women to not just be stuck at lower levels, right? But we can also sometimes get too stuck on tying our success to our self-worth. And we need to realize like, we are worthy just for being ourselves, and that the title isn't everything. Like that, just getting a promotion is not what's going to make us happy.
For sure. And I think that a lot of times the experiences that you have, the impact you're able to make are as important, if not even more than the title, which you can take them elsewhere and say, this is what I've done. This is the impact I was making. And yes, maybe the title was not reflecting that appropriately, but that will be much more impactful to actually share what you have done than just the title.
Exactly. And titles mean different things at different companies too, right? It's not like titles are equal across the tech industry, for example, too. And so I think sometimes we get fixated on titles. And again, it's not that it's not important, but don't let it be what's keeping you down, right? Like don't fixate just on that.
For sure. And before we part ways, I want to ask you, Jossie, if there's anything else you would like to share with the audience, anything they haven't touched on.
Oh, I think we touched on a lot of things, but I think I'd reinforce the don't get disappointed, right? Like, for example, when I was trying to get to the exec level at Tile, I was earlier, I was like, how else do I do it? Right. Like this had been like before I even created that promotion packet, like proposal, it had been like a 6 month, like, oh, maybe I do this or maybe I do that. Right. And so what did I not let myself do? Get discouraged. Right. And say like, it's never going to happen. I had a belief I can make this happen. Let me figure out how it's going to happen. And so don't just get discouraged if you hear no. That doesn't mean no for always, and advocate for yourselves. Like your male colleagues are doing it. Actually, I will leave with one final story. So I managed for 13 of the years in my corporate days. And I can most likely count on one hand how many times a woman came to me and asked for a promotion. And I cannot count how many times like the guys. And yes, I know I had more guys on my team, but still it was disproportionate, right? Like so ask. It starts with just being willing to ask, and there is nothing wrong with asking. It is not, your manager is not a mind reader.
For sure. And actually, it kind of relates to a book that I think is a must read, Women Don't Ask. And I can put that recommendation. Yes, this is definitely something you should do. And before we end for today, Jossie, tell us, what are you up to nowadays and how can women reach out to you and get your support?
Yes. So right now I have 2 ways that you can really work with me. I have my full one-on-one coaching, which is a 6-month program. During the summer, I'm actually doing what I'm calling a coaching on the go program. So it's actually a voice notes based coaching where we do it all through this app called Voxer. So that way you can get coaching support wherever you are without having to hop on a Zoom call. And so I'm doing that as a little 3-month program. So if you're interested in either of those, feel free to, the biggest place I am is on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me a DM on LinkedIn. And I also have in my newsletter, I have a guide to what are the top 8 areas that you need to work on to rise up the ranks into tech leadership. So I'll be sure to share that link as well.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to share all the links. And wow, I love that program that you have. Sounds very, very exciting.
Yeah. I wanted to come up with first a more affordable way of working with me. And also I know like as women, especially during the summer, we get super busy. And so having a way to get support without having to schedule yet another Zoom call.
Yeah, love it. I'll have to check it out, this books are up. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jossie. It's been a pleasure. speaking with you today.
It is so nice getting to do this chat with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for listening to the episode with Jossie. I hope it is going to help you with your promotion strategy. And before you go, I wanted to give you a sneak peek of next week's episode. Next week, I'm sitting down with Christine Sparker. She is the founder of Co-Found Her, and she's also an author of Unwinding Perfect. And she's going to talk about her incredible journey of finding her authentic voice and redefining what it means to lead with authenticity and strength. And we also dive into how women can bring their true selves into negotiations and the workplace. And I think it's going to be super valuable for you. So you definitely don't want to miss this episode. Tune in to next week for an inspiring conversation, and I'll see you then. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to never miss an episode. And as always, let me know what did you like and what would you like to hear next in future episodes. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.